Grandfather
joined the army.
Farmers do have good times and they have bad times,
And we've got to be out.
Living off the land, 100 years of farming in South Devon.
Episode 6, Conflict and Change. The impact of war on farming. Before 1939.
My grandfather's Uncle Richard died with no children, and he left then Locks Farm and Town Farm to my great-grandfather. And then my grandfather had a brother, so those two took on, one took on Locks Farm and one took on Town Farm. So my grandfather was William Richard Ernest Tucker, and he took on Town Farm, which is basically about 10 acres. He then had a horse and wagon, 2 horses and a wagon, and he then used to go from Pro to Dartmouth 1 day a week and collect, this is 15 miles, and he used to collect various produce from various farms along the way all around this area, and he went into the market square in at Dartmouth and sold his produce and then worked his way home. Bearing in mind the journey was, 4.5 hours each way, because the horse was only walking for 15 miles. He then went on and bought a T Ford car, chopped the back off the T Ford car and built a body on the back and turned it into a truck. And then he used to go to Dartmouth, and he went from 1 day a week up to nearly every day of the week. Then in 1923 he bought a shop in Dartmouth, and we had the shop until 1955. Grandfer used to grow market garden produce. That was his main thing because he only had small acreage.
Do you know the story of the warble fly? The fly lays his eggs on the cow's legs, I think, and they burrow in and they live inside and live inside and live inside. And when they come to their end of their time inside, they go up under the skin and burrow a hole in the hide to come out. And there'd be lumps on them, and if you were ever so careful you could brush off the top and there'd be a hole and you'd see a huge great maggot inside. It's quite true, it'd be as big as my little finger. Anyway, the maggot would eat its way out through the hide, and then if it was a heavy infestation, the hides were holy when the tanners got to them, you see, and they couldn't use that part of the hide. Well, then the ministry were very clever and came up with something that would, you'd mix it up and put it on the animal's back, and that would kill it all off. And then in the end, we got to the end of the warble flies altogether. And that's why the cows used to gad so early, so because the warble flies would make up gad, because they terrify them.
grandfather, then my father, and then I was never the tenant, and this comes back to the laws of the landowner. My father was a tenant, and there was no security tenant in those days. And when he was getting into the end of his years, and I was a bit anxious because if he'd have passed away, I should not have had any chance of buying the farm. But it was sold within his lifetime, and I hadn't to get the chance of buying it. So that's how I got established in Strachney. So I was privileged in some way. It's an opportunity I had that other people didn't get. There was another family, boys that I was friendly with on the farm, on the estate, and they'd lost their father in that circumstance, and they had to move away from the farm. So, it's just good luck and bad luck, isn't it? I think the first thing I can sort of remember, 27, was the birth of my brother, and he's 4 years younger than me. And I don't remember any detail, but I think from what I recall, my mother had a difficult birth, and there was a lot of confusion. And the thing I remember was, it was on a very fine day and they were making hay down the field down the bottom of the farm, and I was taken down there. I remember going down to this field, and to get me out of the way, presumably, I don't know who took me there, but I remember going there. I can still remember it. And then we came back to the house, and there was a lot of demand on, wanted hot water, and I remember that, you see. And then it was boiled on a wood fire with an old crock, wasn't it? And that's one of my first memories, really. And I was 4 then.
Mother used to take great pride in her cream. And Saturdays, the customers would put out their cream dishes with what amount of cream they want in, 2 ounces, 4 ounces, 6 ounces. Oh, they'd sometimes have half a pound. They'd put out their dishes, and some would be quite lovely. Some would be on a stem, if you please. We'd always take a great big market basket, and Mother would issue us with some, some clean bags, clean greaseproof bags. And when you picked up the dish from the customer, you'd write on the piece of paper who it was and the amount they wanted, and put the dish in that bag, and then the bag would go in the big basket. And by the time we finished, we'd have a pile, We had a little boy or a young man that used to, or a little boy, I suppose, used to help on the milk round. He'd come with running glass dish in each hand. That's Mrs. Somebody's and that's Mrs. Somebody's. And you had to get it quite right and put the amount they wanted. And then Mother used to get out 4 o'clock Sunday mornings, because she used to take it up fresh Sunday mornings, and put it in the dishes, put it back in the bag again. And then we made a big tray that used to fit on the back seat of the car, a shallow tray, because you didn't want it deep. And they were all put out in order where we wanted them to take them. And you'd do it for 6 months a quarter. Let's see what work went into that, didn't it?
Grandford Tucker started with Town Farm, then he bought 1918, he bought Shepherd's Farm, and then he rented Torrens Farm, and then he bought Torrens Farm, and then he bought Higher House Farm. What we farm today, my sons and myself, was 100 years ago or 110 years ago, 23 separate farms. I find that quite really bad, really. And those 23 farms all supported separate families, employed workmen, lots of them. And today, although we've split the farm is split up now, so my 3 sons have all got farms of their own. Stephen, my middle son, has been farming nearly 700 acres by himself, because his children are either at university or at school. And you sort of wonder how he does manage. He has managed for the last 2 years. But it is a vast difference now from what it was.
And of course, those days you didn't buy much food in. If it's just nearly everything was from the farm, even the oats that were used to feed the shire horses for your power. So today, we buy in, although on this farm I don't buy in much, I do buy in nuts for the sheep, especially when you've got a cold winter like we just had. A lot of farmers have had an expensive 12 months because of the main thing was the long winter. But of course we have to buy in the fuel for the tractors, but not having employed staff, you hire in a contractor, you get a substantial bill at the end, but at least my fuel tank doesn't have to be filled so often.
Well, that was the difference that I was told in the 1930s recession. Farmers could shut the doors at the gates at the end of the road and live. They didn't have all the modern bills of electricity and telephone and insurances and fuel bills and all. They just didn't have that. They could live off the land, probably go to the local place and get some paraffin for their lamps a couple of times a week, but that was about once a week, I don't know. That's the only thing he really needed. Other than that, everything else could come off the farm. Milk, butter, cheese, fruit. There wasn't apples grown here, but a lot of the villages back that way, if you look at the old maps, lots of apple orchards, and they weren't all cider, although they used to drink a lot of cider because cider was part of the wages for the workmen.
Evacuation.
Alan come in one evening, he said, "You'll never believe." So I said, "What would I believe?" He said, "We've got to get out." Get out. Well, he said, "We've been issued with notices to, there's going to be, it's going to be used as a battle training area, and we've got to be out." And that was the 13th of November, and they had to be out by the 19th of December. So there was only 6 weeks to move everything. I mean, you think of your house to start with, well, then you forget that and think about outdoors, because there's all your cattle, all your winter feed that you've got in store. Well, everything, all your machinery, even down to your dog and cat. Alan was lucky in a way, because although all this was gone, we did have about 50 acres the other side of the road and a shed, which meant we could hang on to the cows, because we had feed for the cows, but we had to hump the feed all across there. It was all done, well, there were a few tractors about then, and, well, the ministry did sort of help, but everybody wanted the ministry, so in the end, you were left doing it on your own, really. A lot of the hay was in ricks, you see, what we'd have put on in the summer. Well, that all had to be opened up and cut out and put in bales and transported across the road to where you were going. A lot of the store cattle that they couldn't house for the winter or couldn't home were sold at some sales that were especially for people that were evacuated. There was some at Kingsbridge. I think there was some at Totnes. But there were so many of us in the same boat that was selling, and so few people could buy, because there were so many parishes that were in the same boat that they didn't make a very good price, actually. But, well, at least sold them. Alan had friends out to street, and they'd been there all their married life, reared their children out there, and she couldn't bear the thought of leaving, and she died on the doorstep the last day when they were taking her out, moving the last things out. She died. And it was very sad, because it was out to the street. And, because they'd closed the area on the 19th for some unknown reason, because, they didn't move in, but, they would not let her come back to the street to be buried. And it had only been a week, and she's buried at Stoke Fleming. Some people that farmed only down to Old Milcombe or Ford, they were able to buy a farm on the other side of Exeter, and it was the best thing that ever happened to them. Because in a lot of the farmers had cottagers that went away from the area. There was no electricity and no running water in the villages. When they went away to something better, they weren't going to come back again, not the cottagers that had nothing to come back for. It did really disrupt the area tremendously, the evacuation. Christmas that year was, such a Christmas. People had reared their turkeys and geese, and then they'd moved in and gone in with Auntie that let them have 2 rooms, one up and down, and a little tiny stove. Well, then they had a turkey from here to there, and they had to absolutely cook the joints, cut it in joints, because no way could they cook it whole, because they didn't have anywhere to cook it. But somehow we got through. Alan's mother decided not to come back, so Alan and I got married in the August and came back shortly after that. Well, Alan's mother lived over to Sidborough for a little while with her daughter Mary. Joan had joined the army by that time. George Cornish had been with the family since about 1920, I think. And he went somewhere for the evacuation. So he said to Alan, "When you go home, you let me know and I'll come." And we did, and he came back. And of course, in those days, farmers' wives and farmhouses often, boarded their staff. I had George for years. A lot of farmers did that then. But, I can't see them doing it now. They just wouldn't want it. The young brides would tell you where to go. Took a little while to pick up the threads after you came back, because You know, we came back there was no post, there was no telephone. I mean, we didn't have electric anyway, so that was no worry to us. But it took a long time, and a lot of the neighbours never came back. It took a long time for the ones that did to just pick up the threads again, really.
Conflicts and change.
Another girl I used to go to school with at Stoke Fleming, she was called Dorothy, and she was killed in the Blitz in Dartmouth. She was working in a shop in Dartmouth, and well, they found her when they were finished digging out, so it was very sad.
Farmers do have good times and they have bad times, and I think the reason for that is when it's good times, everybody wants to do it, and when everybody's doing it, they get in each other's way. So I think our wealth really is, it's a good way of life, and it's healthy to be out in the open.
But I mean, it was an enjoyable life in lots of ways, because that's all you knew, wasn't it? You didn't know anything different. Well then, you see, as you come on, when I joined the Young Farmers, that was a big step forward. Reluctantly, I had to be persuaded to join it because none of my friends had joined it, and then I joined it, and that was a sort of another education, really. It broadened your outlook in life. You met people that had got a broader outlook, or very much that same outlook. You go forward from then, and I suppose then they always looked on the Young Farmers as being a mating agency. Well, it was. I met my wife through the Young Farmers, went to their farm to do sheep shearing and this sort of thing, and that's how you met and married within that farming circle. And well, then you settled down and took on your own business, didn't you? And it was just evolution, really. That's what was happening to us all. And Ivybridge Young Farmers in those days, there was up to 100 members in it. And one of the good things I think had happened was when the land girls came into the field, and they came in and joined the Young Farmers Club. And that brought another aspect into it, another way of life into it, a way of life that we knew nothing about. So
did you have an evacuee staying with you?
Not actually with us, no, I didn't.
So how many would there have been in the area?
I can't tell you a number, but many.
Mm.
Yeah, quite a few. And I mean, I met up with a similar experience several years ago now, when I went to Germany for a time, and I met a lady there who had been evacuated from Poland and pushed out in 1945. That was by the Russians, and they came down, a small farming family. They packed all their goods on a wagon with one horse and went ahead of the advancing army, and they eventually ended down to a port on the Baltic where there's a ship waiting to take them into West Germany. So they tied the horse up to the lamppost and left it there, and she went into Germany as an evacuee. Went into the village. The villagers came in, and she was taken on by a farming family. A girl of about 14 she was, or perhaps a little less, and it sort of relived what the experience that I've been through many years before. And it's still happening today in some parts of the world, isn't it? Where it's history repeating itself in some ways, and we don't learn much from that history. She went into domestic science, and when I went there to visit her years after, she took me back to the farm, had taken her in as a refugee. And it was most interesting, really. I mean, the way of life in Germany is much, to me, seemed much more male-oriented and much more disciplined than what my way of life was. But it's a similar pattern.
My mum and dad didn't have evacuees in the war, but my wife, Jill's mum and dad did, and she could probably tell you a little bit more about it.
Well, my dad was a butcher in at Kingsbridge, And yes, the children from London used to come down, and I presume on the train, and be kind of downloaded in Kingsbridge, there on the quay, and then they used to be like sectioned off, and people would obviously offer to have these children. And my mum had, she was 9, Eileen, when she originally came, and 2 of her other sisters were here as well, but they didn't go together, they were separated. And so Eileen spent a few years or a couple of years with my mum, and we've always kept in touch since. And Eileen is now 82, and she still comes down every year to visit us, and comes here and stays on the farm.
From our point of view, my grandfather moved in here in 1945. The farm was previously evacuated for the training of the American troops to serve in D-Day landings. He moved in here in October of 1945.
January.
January, there we are, January 1945. The farm was very very different to what it is today. A very small arrangement of buildings. The farmhouse is obviously very similar. My father then took over. He moved here in 1976, didn't you?
Yes.
So, and I obviously took over in 2000. So we've now had 3 generations here.
I had a sister-in-law. Eventually, she came down here as a land girl, and she was in a sweet factory in London. And when she came out, David Horton's mother was a girl out of Swansea, and I don't know anything much more about it, but I think she came from a mining background. But she made a marvellous farmer's wife, and you know, she was ever so good on the farm, and her outlook, life was good as well. And I think perhaps to sort of the little thing I noticed about her, I think she brought up in a community of people, and she had a more interest in sport and what was going on in the area. And one thing I remember particularly about her, I went to see her not many months before she passed away, and I walked into her home on a Saturday when the Grand National was on. Oh, she said, "Have you picked out a horse for the Grand National?" Well, I didn't know the Grand National was on. Oh yes, she said, "I've got one," and she followed it through. Didn't win, but she had an interest. Although she was, her years were ticking by, she'd still got an interest in life, which I'd never appreciated really, but it was there. But I think it's been brought up in a different atmosphere that did it.
Yes, 1939, the Christmas 1939, we had a cowman at home, and he joined the Air Force. My sister went nursing, and I came home from school to milk a cows. You know, the men went to war, so much was left to the ladies to do, and we carried on with the milk round, well, until I got married, actually. I think they gave it up shortly after that, 12 months perhaps.
In Conflict and Change, we heard from
Harry Kurzweil, Jill Kurzweil, David Dark, Phil Dark, David Wall, Mark Wall, Richard Foss, John Sherrill, Jean Sherrill, Roger Tucker, John Tucker, Bill Salter, and Marjorie Buckbit. Living Off the Land was produced by Lucinda Guy for Sound Art Radio in partnership with South Devon Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, and was supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund as part of All Our Stories.